This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, real MVPs? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back for another edition of the Primetime Podcast right here on Most Valuable Podcasts. And Brandon, this is the moment of truth for two reasons. Number one, football's right around the corner. This is the first podcast of the official football season. There was some college football on this past weekend, but this week, first week of games, and we're also making our picks on this podcast too.
Ricky, it's good to be back. As much fun as the predictions were and the previews were and everything
Every
like that.
Every single Power 5 team.
But it's nice to kind of get back into this groove, knowing that the season's finally coming, finally here, and we can actually see how stupid we were in making those and having those previews, which is the best part. But it's going to be really interesting how the season plays out, and there's still a lot of things to be determined. Alabama has not declared their starting quarterback yet. I mean, is Alabama going to be back this year?
Illinois did. Apparently it's A.J. Bush, but what do I know?
Who, you knew him before, right? No, you didn't. But that's why it's very exciting, because there's going to be a lot of things that happen in college football. There's going to be a lot of surprises. There's going to be a lot of upsets. We know it. It's going to be fun.
Well, before we get into everything, and like Brandon said, we are going to look stupid today because first we're making our official hold us to them college football playoff predictions. We already did it for the playoffs in the NFL and the onside kick. You guys can go ahead and check that out for you NFL fans. But we do the college side today, doing it a week later than usual because there was that 1 week that we skipped and had to push the previews back. But today is where we give our playoff, we give our winners of each Power 5 conference, we give our national champion that both Brandon and I think will be crowned the national champion at the end of the year. We're also going to look into the Urban Meyer suspension and what that means for Ohio State football the first 3 weeks of the season. Then we're going to do, at first I was going to call it our preseason big board, but I said screw it. This is week one. We're putting out our number one big board, only top 10, but our number one big board before the season starts. And then we're going to close everything out, making our picks for week one of the top 25 teams. And before we get into everything, a little bit of housekeeping. First off, I'm going to change it up. Go down below, click the link. You can get this cool shirt that I'm wearing, the Most Valuable Podcast official t-shirt. You can get that down below in the description. You can also get it at mostvaluablepodcast.com, where you can catch MVP each and every day as well. Make sure to support us on Patreon also, where you can join the $10 tier. We got a new patron, by the way, and I am excited for him to join a podcast because he has been, it's one of those where you listen to like Waddle and Sylvie and The Score, and they call in and they go, hey, Brandon, first time, long time here. Trevor Kinney is now a patron. Thank you to Trevor. Just got the email, I think it was last night or 2 nights ago, and he is one of those first time, long times where Trevor has gone back, throwing up the L for Louisville, especially in our comment section on the Primetime Podcast. But you can be a patron as well. That is down below in the description. And last but not least, make sure to give the podcast a 5-star rating on iTunes. Brandon, I have not checked. I didn't do my due diligence, but I am still going to say that we are not a couple of good old boys. And that comment on iTunes, it's just wrong. We're talking about more than the SEC today. We don't even have, if really, we have one Big Ten topic and then multiple topics about other teams outside of the SEC. This is where you guys come in. You got to go to iTunes. You got to set the record straight. Let people know we're not a couple of good old boys that just talk about the SEC. We talk about all college football and college basketball as well. But Brandon, let's jump into things. How we're going to do this is go conference by conference through the Power Fives, really. And then at the end, we will give our 1 through 4. Then we'll kind of run through our playoff and name our champion. So in this one, we're not going to go in the order that we did previews. We're just going to go in the order of alphabetical order. So with the ACC, I will let you go first for this one. What are your kind of thoughts on the ACC, and what are you thinking about how this conference will shape up at the end of the year?
Well, the ACC As Clemson. I mean, number one. That's about all you really have to say.
So the Atlantic is out.
No, but I mean, you look at it, and Clemson, there's so many guys on Clemson that could have easily gone to the NFL this past year. They could have been in the draft. They could be starters on NFL teams. They are not. They're starters on Clemson's defense. And Clemson's defense is going to have, if not the best defense in the country, certainly one of the best defenses in the country. And again, I think Clemson's going to have a nice offense. They return their running backs. They have good quarterback play. I like the young guy that they have coming in there. I think eventually, if he doesn't start off the bat, I think that it will eventually go over to him. Defensively, we are looking at a team that is stacked up front. The front seven is dominant. They're solid. They're going to cause chaos for just about every team they play, and every quarterback is going to shudder when they know that they're going to have to be playing against Clemson. I think Clemson is going to come out of the ACC.
Who are they going to beat?
They're going to beat Miami.
Okay.
I think Miami's going to do well. I think that they're going to look good. I know that whenever we do our Miami previews, we always get flack for something, whether we said someone's name wrong or we were just flat out wrong in the minds of the fans.
This year it was N'Kosi Perry, where people were saying, no way is Perry going to start. We weren't saying he was going to, but that was the big thing in the comment section this year for Cane fans. And
apparently we overlooked that Rozier had just lost his father, so we were not very, very, I guess, thoughtful in that fact that he had just lost his father, and that's why he had played poorly in those last 3 games. And while that very well could be the case, he still played poorly in those last 3 games. I think that with Miami, if their defense is able to cause a lot of disruption like they did last season, they were able to get a lot of turnovers. They got hyped and they got into games energy-wise because of that defense. Offensively, they were really motoring along through most of the season, but that last month of the season was really their Achilles heel. As long as that does not happen for them this year, I think they should be fine on their side of the conference. I think it will be Clemson, and I think it will be Miami, but again, Clemson, they're going to be one of the best teams in college football this year. They're going to beat Miami.
See, and this is to me why when it comes to the ACC this year, I mean, I don't want to disrespect Louisville because I've usually been on the Louisville bandwagon, especially when they had Teddy Bridgewater and especially when they had Lamar Action Jackson. And Florida State fans are going to say, oh, I'm just overlooking Florida State as well. But I feel of the 2 divisions in the ACC, it's going to be, unless like there's some catastrophic upset, even if they have a Syracuse-like upset, they'll still get to the playoff. They'll still win the ACC. Clemson's the juggernaut in the Atlantic Division this year. To me, all the focus for me in the ACC will be on the Coastal Division and on that side because we talked about it before. We've got 3 teams, in my opinion, that could fight for the Coastal crown. And of the 3, I mean, the first one, Georgia Tech, I like Georgia Tech this year. I think they'll be improved. The thing I don't like is on top of playing, obviously, Miami and Virginia Tech, they have to play Clemson at home, which home or away, Clemson's going to be a tough team, but you rather have them at home rather than on the road in Death Valley. The other game, I don't think they're going to win. At Georgia, yeah, I know it's a rivalry game in any given Saturday, but I really like the Georgia Bulldogs this year. And that schedule of seeing Clemson, Miami, Virginia Tech, and then Georgia might be too much for the Yellow Jackets. And then you got the Hokies and the Hurricanes, where for me there's one important game that stands out. Well, 2, but it's more 1A and then 1B. The 1B is Florida State because you have Virginia Tech. They play Florida State at Florida State to start the year on Memorial Day. The interesting thing about that, the thing that I like for Virginia Tech, they're getting them week 1. They're getting them before the Seminoles can kind of grow into what they are going to be this season. Compared to a Miami, they get them at the beginning of October. So this Florida State team will have a couple games under its belt and will be more of the team that we expect them to be this season. That's why, for me, the most important game is Virginia Tech, October 6th, when you have the Fighting Irish coming to town. Because if, let's say, you lose on Labor Day and then you lose to Notre Dame, you can kiss a college football playoff goodbye, because I don't think with 2 losses you're getting into the college football playoff. But number 3, if you lose to Florida State and then lose to Notre Dame, then that could make that Hurricane game first interesting, because a 2-loss team getting into the conference title would definitely shake up the picture. But it would also be like, you know what? We might take a step back, and Miami might be able to overtake us. Although I am a VT fan and I do bleed orange and blue and maroon and orange, and I know in the Hurricane video I got flack for doing it, though I was a Hokie fan. I got to throw up the U, because it's going to be Clemson versus the Hurricanes in the ACC title game. But like you, really, it's like, Ricky, you've been talking for about, you've been rambling now for almost like 3 minutes, and it's useless, because Clemson is going to win the ACC in the end.
And I think it's a bit of a shame for Florida State because of the fact that they're on the side with Clemson. If they weren't on the side with Clemson, I think Florida State could possibly push to knock Miami from the top spot on the other side. So this Florida State team is going to be a team that's going to be rejuvenated, and they're going to be a team that looks like a new team. And people would say, Brandon, well, they kind of are. Willie Taggart goes in there. He implements a new system. It's a different culture that they're working with, and different play calling. I mean, it's going to be completely different play calling with a new playbook, which is, I think, more the speed for the players and a little bit easier to grasp and understand. They have named DeAndre Francois as the starter there. Blackman is not going to start the season. We've talked about this a number of times. I chose Blackman as the guy who I believed would be the starter due to things that had happened with Francois, and due to the fact that I think Blackman in a lot of areas is a little bit more talented, raw talent and otherwise, and skill with, as opposed to DeAndre Francois, who still, don't get me wrong, he's very good. I loved him when he had his freshman season last year, a complete wash, really. Really unfortunate to see that happen to him in the first game against Alabama. But don't get me wrong, this Florida State team, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them by going right to Clemson and saying it's going to be Clemson who wins it. I just think Clemson is so dominant. Not to say that Florida State's not going to be a very competitive and they are a talented team and actually be able to push to be good this year. But with Clemson in front of you, it's really hard to say that Florida State is going to push Clemson for the top spot. I just don't think that's going to happen. Not this season, but Florida State is going to be an improved team for sure.
Let's move on. Let's go into the Big 12. I'm going to start. We'll kind of do a little flip-flop motion. Here's what I am thinking for the Big 12 this year. Oklahoma, yeah, I know Sean came on the podcast while you were out and he was filling in for you. Thanks again to Sean Anderson for those weeks that he filled in for you. But yeah, Sean pissed off Sooner fans by saying that he called it that the Sooners were going to lose to Florida Atlantic to open up the year. Even though I don't believe that with him, Lane Kiffin will not be beating Murray and the Sooners. The Sooners are going to be an interesting one, coming off of a high stellar last season with Baker Mayfield and the boys going to the college football playoff, although they lost to the Georgia Bulldogs in a thrilling Rose Bowl game. It's going to be interesting because I think that they might be near the top, but what's going to happen with this shakeup? Is TCU going to be right behind them? Is it a foregone conclusion that it's Oklahoma, TCU? How good will Texas be this year? Will Iowa State go ahead and make the climb this year? They were 5-4, but let's be honest, there were 4 teams last year in the Big 12 that were tied at 5-4 in the conference. Here's a prediction I know for sure in this conference. I'm sorry to Pat, but the Kansas Jayhawks will finish in last place. That is one that I know is true.
Are you confident with that?
I am confident in that one. They might win a game in conference.
Are you confident with that?
No, I'm not confident in that one at all, but I know they will be in last place. I am going to go with a bold one here, and It may shock some people, but I am going to go Red River rivalry in the Big 12 title game. Texas playing the Sooners for the Big 12 title. And I'm actually going to say, shocker, Texas wins the Big 12 this year.
Okay. Wow. Well, I am not going to go out on a limb that's starting to crack like that.
I always I pull for Tom Herman's Texas team. It's just what I do. It's just what I do. It's ever since he got hired, I've been all over the Texas Longhorns.
I'm going to go with Oklahoma here. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say Oklahoma over TCU with West Virginia behind them. And Oklahoma this year, while yes, they don't have Baker Mayfield, and while yes, they lost Orlando Brown on the offensive line, mm-hmm. and yes, they lost probably Baker's one of his favorite targets in Andrews, I think that this team still has enough. I think they still have enough to be able to be a competitive team. Kyler Murray, I think that he will be the starter at quarterback. He's extremely talented. Is this not the guy who could be playing football, could be playing baseball for the Oakland Athletics? He got drafted there? No?
He is for sure going to play baseball after his college season.
Okay, so he is going to be playing baseball.
He's officially signed his contract with the A's.
I don't know. I'm not a avid follower of Kyler Murray.
Because that was a whole big ordeal that I had during the Oklahoma preview, that what if he wanted to play football? And Sean kept telling me, no, he is playing baseball after he plays football this season. That's why a ton of people in the comment section kind of called him stupid for doing so, because if he gets injured, then you're risking your baseball career.
So with everything else there at Oklahoma too, you've got Rodney Anderson at running back. This guy is a guy who didn't come in until like midway of the season, and he still has over 1,100 yards and double-digit touchdowns. This is an offensive line that the only guy they lose is Orlando Brown. Mm-hmm. Everyone else is returning. That should be great for Murray. That should be great for Anderson. You have a couple of good speedsters and deep threats at wide receiver. This team is still set up offensively for really good success. I don't see a scenario where Oklahoma... I'm not trying to be ignorant on this either. I don't foresee a scenario where Oklahoma does not hold on to their grasp in the Big 12. Now, I don't want to say that I don't think that other people will challenge them for that, but I just don't think that anyone's going to be able to overtake them.
Here's the question I'm going to ask you. Are we sleeping too much on West Virginia?
So early on in the year, when we started these previews like years ago, it feels like, but months ago, I was not very high on West Virginia. I didn't feel all that great about them. They weren't giving me that good vibe. But as things have gone on and progressed, West Virginia is looking more and more like a really could be competitive team. And a lot of people are ranking them pretty high up there as like the number 2 team behind Oklahoma. Now, that all comes down to whether or not their quarterback ends up being Will Grier. If Will Grier is going to be the guy that Florida always wanted him to be, and he never could be, if he ends up being the guy that people have expected him to be, if he morphs into that Will Grier, West Virginia could be the number 2 team and really push Oklahoma. But if he plays like he played when he was at Florida, I don't think they're a threat. That's the only thing. Which Will Grier shows up. And
the main reason why I asked this, I know we got a ton of comments in the West Virginia preview about it, but I just feel with you picking Oklahoma, TCU, me picking Texas, Oklahoma, which Texas is even a little bit of a long shot. Not a huge long shot, but more of a long shot than like a TCU, and some may think a West Virginia to get in, that some West Virginia Mountaineer fans might be a little angry at that, but for me, the big thing is with everything is like I look at the schedules where for Texas, it's going to be the USC game for me will be the most important because, yeah, they get to play Oklahoma, they get to play West Virginia, they'll play TCU, but out of conference for college football playoff. How's that USC game going to look? Oklahoma has the easiest schedule. That's why I think they'll be the number 1 seed going into the championship game, or the Big 10 or Big 12 championship game. And then for TCU, what are you going to do against Ohio State? Like, that is going to be the marquee game for them out of conference. So, I mean, TCU could be one that jumps in, and very safe to say TCU Oklahoma, but that's why I'm going to go bold and say Texas over Oklahoma for the Big 12, even if Texas is like a 2-loss team in that second place spot in the Big 12.
Texas, I think, will be much improved offensively. Defensively, they were so poor last year. They played so poorly in so many games where they gave up so many points. Will they be able to make a big enough jump to be able to get all the way to the top? I mean, they were not very, I don't want to say they weren't very competitive last year. They really struggled. They really struggled in the first year under Tom Herman. A lot of people had high expectations for year one, and they ended up, 5-7?
5-4 in conference.
If they end up getting to 7 wins this year, 8 wins, I think that would be great for them. But I don't think that 7 or 8 wins is going to put them in the top 3 of the conference. Well, that's the only thing. And while Texas could be making an even bigger jump than that, maybe they do, but I don't know if they'll be able to do all of that here in year 2. They could. I mean, Tom Herman has these guys, I think, fully bought into this program now in Texas. And that was Tom Herman's number one thing. I need them to buy in to this system. I need them to buy into this culture of we're going to win. Everything in the past is in the past. We're moving forward. And he said they bought into that. And if you have players buying into that, and you've got a guy like Tom Herman, who's he's coming from a winning program over at Houston, what he built up and was able to do there, he brings those winning ways over to Texas. You've got to believe that guys, they do want to play for him, and 2, they want to go with anything that he's saying because they believe in him. They believe in what he says, and they believe that if they do it, it will make them better. They will be winners. So Texas could make the leap, but I think it's a bit high this year of a thought and of a wishful thought to think that they could be challenging Oklahoma for the title.
Let's move on. The next conference, the Big 10. Actually, before we do, you said Oklahoma TCU, but did you give a winner? Did
Oklahoma.
You say, okay, Oklahoma over TCU. Just wanted to make sure that was out there because I don't remember if you gave a winner or not. But the next conference, to me, I think this is a little bit about like similar to the ACC. One division already has their champion crowned. The other one's going to be a dogfight to see who gets in. I'll let you go first. What are you thinking about the Big 10?
The Big 10, in the Big 10 East, it is going to be an interesting race this year. The
dogfight.
It's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be interesting because when we talked about it in our previews, it's going to be a lot of those teams right at the top. It's going to be Ohio State, it's going to be Michigan, it's going to be Penn State and Michigan State, and they're all going to be beating up on each other. That's how I see it this year. I don't want to say that there's going to be a clear front runner that rises all the way to the top. I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen. I think that there's a lot of different teams who, with what they've lost, who they still have. If you go by all of that, some people could say Michigan State may be the most impressive because they are returning some of the most starters. A lot of people could say Michigan, they're the most impressive. They're returning a lot of starters. They're returning a lot of starters defensively. And a Harbaugh defense is something you do not want to mess with. But then people will say, well, what about the offense for Ohio State? What about the offense for Penn State, even minus Saquon Barkley? So that's why it's going to be a dogfight, and it's not they've got JT Barrett, and they've got Dobbins, and they've got this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and all this. It's not just Ohio State's to win, and no one else is even going to come close. However, I still am going to go Ohio State on that side. I'm going to go Ohio State. It's going to be, I don't want to say it's going to be close, but it's going to be a really interesting run and season between all these teams right there at the top, because I think that Ohio State, they will come out victorious in the East. They lose a lot of guys defensively, but Urban Meyer's done a great job of building that up through recruiting and making sure that there's guys to go right in there and fill in, kind of like the Alabama. There's always someone else that you can pluck out, even though Nick Saban says there isn't. They poop them out of their butt, and boom, there they are. So I like Ohio State there, and then on the other side, I really like Wisconsin. I really like Wisconsin. I think
it's like the Atlantic for the ACC.
I think that's a clear cut. I mean, you return Jonathan Taylor, you return all your starters on the offensive line. This team is going to be so good. It's just going to come down to, can they beat Ohio State and finally win the Big Ten all to themselves?
Can they?
I think they can.
So you're picking
and
Wisconsin.
I'm picking Wisconsin.
See, I'm on the other side. First off, I'm on the other side where you said that when you talked about the Big Ten East and you said there's not going to be one team that runs away with it. A, I think there's a dogfight. 2, I think there's a team that runs away with it. And the reason why I say that is I do agree that the games between Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, and Ohio State will be tough. But there's only one game on the schedule I see Ohio State possibly losing.
The Michigan game.
TCU.
Oh.
TCU. Well, the thing with Michigan, here's what I'm looking at. With Michigan and Penn State, the thing that I don't like looking at the schedule is not only do you have to play the 3 from your side of the Big Ten, you also have to play Wisconsin. So to me, you're already throwing a challenging wrench into that situation. Ohio State, they get Michigan end of the year where they're going to be a well-oiled machine. Same thing with Michigan State. Yeah, they got to go to East Lansing, but it's in second week of November. We're in, like, Urban Meyer's thinking we're a well-oiled machine by November, sniffing out the playoffs. Of course, upsets can happen. Just ask Michigan about Iowa, but anything can happen. The Penn State one's interesting because that's earlier in the year. The TCU one's the most interesting one because it's the first major opponent that this team will play without their fearless leader, Urban Meyer, at the helm. It's with the other coaches that will be coaching up that game. That's why I say that's the only loss for me. And I think Ohio State is going to, once Urban Meyer comes back, they are going to rally around him. And they are going to go on a run that is unspeakable, where it's basically they are going to use it as momentum. They're going to rally around their coach. They're just going to win, 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 win. Yes, some of those games will be tough wins. I'm not saying they're going to blow everyone out, but I do think this is a 1-loss, 0-loss team. That TCU game is that. I agree with you. They will play Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game, but then they will beat Wisconsin, and Ohio State will go on to win the Big Ten title after being a 0 undefeated team in the regular season or a 1-loss team in the regular season.
Sorry for the long pause. I was writing something down and I wasn't sure you were going to be done then. But
you got to think. You got to think about it.
I guess you must be incredibly then high on how well TCU could do. And I think that they'll be towards the top in the Big 12, but I don't think that I would look at that game as being the biggest game and the possible loss for Ohio State. If Ohio State's going to lose a game, it's going to be one of the other Big East teams. It's going to be Michigan State, Michigan, or Penn State. I just don't. If there's a loss, it comes from one of those teams. TCU is. They're not going to blow through them by any means, but they'll beat them. They'll beat them, and they'll beat them. You said they're going to rally around Urban Meyer when he comes back. They're going to want to make sure they win that game for Urban Meyer.
Here's the thing that I'm thinking, and this is kind of how my brain is working right now, is if they lose to TCU, I'm not saying that it's going to be a foregone conclusion that they lose, but if they do lose to TCU, then they have to run the table in the Big Ten in order to make the playoff. Because with 2 losses to ranked teams, because I'm assuming that second loss will come to either Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State kind of a team, with 2 of those losses, you run the risk of maybe not even getting to the Big Ten title game, but even if you do via tiebreakers, and let's say you lose to Michigan, who loses another Big Ten title game, or Big Ten game, and you only lost 1, it was to Michigan, so you get in over them. The TCU one is important for their college football playoff lives. And for me, if Urban Meyer was coaching this game, for sure win. I would not be afraid of TCU, although they would be ranked. It's with Urban Meyer not out there on the sidelines. That's where that percentage creeps up a little bit for TCU, and why that one could be an upset special game when we get to the 3rd week of the college football season.
I'm not as worried as you are, but I see where you're coming from. I'm just on the other side.
So we both have Ohio State, Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game. However, you're going with the Badgers. I'm going with the Buckeyes. Moving on, though, the Pac-12 conference, the conference we just got done previewing last week. I will go first with this one, and I have sat here and I didn't know what to do for this one because I feel like it's similar to the Big Ten and similar to the ACC, where the South, not a problem for me. JT Daniels, the first true freshman to start at quarterback since Matt Barkley for the Trojans. The Trojans are going to be fine. They're going to win the South. I don't think... It's going to be one of those things where the other teams might be causing some rumblings that might be better for the future. Chip Kelly, Kevin Sumlin, Herm Edwards. We might be looking at their teams going, man, I can't wait to see them next year because then they can maybe make a run for the division. It's the North that has me kind of conflicted because Oregon's my dark horse in the Pac-12. They could throw a wrench into everything. They are basically my West Virginia of the Pac-12. Do I think they'll win the South? No, but there's a possibility if everything goes right for them. And I sat here and I went, Bryce Love or Myles Gaskin? Bryce Love or Myles Gaskin? Which one of these 2 teams is going to win the North? And although maybe it's a Cardinal thing because I was all over the Louisville Cardinals and now I'm all over the Stanford Cardinal this year.
You just like your birds.
The Cardinal isn't a bird, it's a tree.
I know, but you like your birds
I like my
by
birds.
saying Cardinal, and I understand it's a tree. Thank you.
The Huskies are going to win the North. And the reason why I came to that conclusion is because I like the quarterback better for Washington than I do for Stanford, even though I do like Bryce Love a hell of a lot. Stanford will play USC, or not Stanford, Washington will play USC, and in that one, it'll be interesting. True freshman, Jake Browning. I got to go with Jake Browning and Myles Gaskin to win the Pac-12 this year, going with the Huskies.
So, for me, it's pretty easy on both sides. I'm going USC, and then on the other side, I'm going Washington. I mean, it's pretty simple, hands down. Bryce Love is an outstanding player. He's excellent, but Bryce Love can't be the only one out there on the field to win the games. I think Washington's just a better team overall. I think they have a better offense with a really, really good quarterback, a great, outstanding running back, good offensive line, and a great defense. And then USC, I don't want to downgrade the other teams, but USC is, I think, by far the best team on that side. I think they're by far the best team still on that side of the conference. It's going to be Washington, USC, and I feel pretty confidently that Washington will win the Pac-12.
All right, let's move on into the. I was thinking about if I wanted to say anything about the Pac-12, and I don't. Do you have anything final to say about them, or this one's
not right now?
Pretty much clean cut. SEC. I'll let you go first. It's your conference. What are you thinking about for the SEC?
The good old boys are going to talk about the SEC now.
This is what you were waiting for, right?
So this one is the least, in my mind, the least anticipated one this year because it's
really,
yeah, kind of. I think that there's a little bit more excitement, I think, coming from some of the other ones because it's. I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel, but I'm going with Alabama. Yes, they always seem to lose some good players every single year, and right now the defense is what you've got to kind of be a little concerned about. They've had a number of guys go down with injury. They've lost a number of guys. Minkah Fitzpatrick, kind of their defensive captain and leader there, is gone. They, you would think, oh man, they're going to have to really retool, and we'll see how it goes. But Alabama every single year has found a way to be really good, no matter who they lose defensively. Offensively, there still has not yet been a quarterback named. I think it's going to be Tua. I just believe that Nick Saban thinks that he can win more and get maybe more consistency as a passer out of Tua, as opposed to Jalen Hurts. While Jalen Hurts is a really great player, he's an outstanding athlete, he's not as good of a passer. He's just not. If you look at a lot of his stats, in many games, he'll have more rushing yards than he will passing yards. And at the end of the day, you think, well, is that good or is that bad? Well, did they win the game? Yeah, they won the game. Well, okay, we can handle it then. But what was the game that it was a struggle and it wasn't going so well and when they couldn't handle it anymore? It was the national championship game. That's when he had to bring in Tua, who had consistency and who had more yards through the air and was consistently passing the ball, hooking up with receivers, getting into a rhythm, something that Jalen just could not do that night and had failed to a number of times during the season. But because he was running really well against those teams and those defenses, it masked the problem. And while I don't think it's Jalen Hurts is a problem by any means, I think that Tua brings more consistency, a better arm, and he'll be the guy that will take you through the playoffs, and you can be confident that he will be able to do that. And I don't want to make that sound as a knock against Jalen, because I really like him. I think he's an outstanding athlete. But then on the other side, so Alabama there, on the other side, I think it's still going to be Georgia. I think Jake Fromm is...
The question I'm going to interject, do the Gamecocks come close? Because one thing, I've been monitoring the comment section for the South Carolina preview, which was one that Sean and I did, so you were not on it. And a lot of Gamecock fans think that they're like, I kind of get the feeling that they think they're the dark horse behind Georgia and could overtake them this year in their side of the SEC.
I think you could probably call them a dark horse, but I think that South Carolina fans would be a little upset with that, saying we're not a dark horse, we're a legitimate contender. And I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be. I mean, remember, Sony Michel and Nick Chubb are both gone. The two-headed monster, gone.
But you still got Jake from State Farm.
And you do, and you do. And is that enough? I think it will be. I think it will be. He's got an experienced receiving corps. That's going to be very helpful. But no Sony and no Chubb. We're going to see how much they're affected by that. And that will be what determines it. I think Fromm will be enough. I think his talent at the quarterback position and I think the talent they have at receiver is going to be enough for them. But South Carolina is going to be right behind him.
So for me, I'm a little bit different than you. First off, I'm going to give a team that I think is going to be a legitimate dark horse. Not dark horse for like could win their side of the SEC, but could play spoiler to the three teams I'm going to talk about, and that's Mississippi State. Mississippi State could play spoiler to either Georgia, Auburn, or Alabama. I'm looking more at the Auburn side of things, but I look at Mississippi State and I think they got some good matchups against these teams. They're going to play spoiler to one of them this year, although in my prediction I don't have them playing spoiler to any of them, so take it how you want. To me, it's a three-team race. Georgia's going to win the East.
I just want to interject something really quickly. What makes you think that Mississippi State will be able to just expand a little bit on that? I'm not trying to call you. I'm just expand on that a little bit. I want to hear your thinking.
For Georgia, actually looking at it, I was looking at the wrong side. They don't play Georgia, but more importantly, the Auburn-Alabama side of it, where for Auburn, October 6th, they're going to Mississippi State. And, I mean, just ask Alabama how they felt going to Mississippi State and going like this after the game.
Yeah.
If he would have just thrown that a little bit more inside, it would have been a touchdown and we would have lost. So, I mean, I look at that and I go, that could be a sneaky game for the Bulldogs. The Crimson Tide, it's weird for me because, yes, it's late in the year. Yes, it's at Alabama. But the one thing I look at is, yes, it's Alabama. Yes, Nick Saban knows how to coach up his guys. But with Tua, will we get a game this year where he looks like a rookie? Because let's be honest, last year, he only had one half of true experience in my mind. This is going to be his first full year as a starter, if he is the starter. Like you said, they still haven't named a starter yet, but that's kind of who I would go with if I was Nick Saban. Are we going to get that rookie moment? And Mississippi State is a team that I like, although it's on the road. LSU's another interesting one for Alabama's sake because they're going on the road to LSU. And the whole question of, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I will. I was watching College Game Day on ESPN, or the college football live that they have. And I can't remember who said it, but it was an interesting point I didn't think of, is if LSU loses the first few games of the year, does Ed Orgeron lose his job much like Les Miles did? And could this team be kind of like a rally team later on that the interim coach gets to fire up and play well at home? I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that they are for sure going to beat Alabama, but those two games back to back could trip up the Crimson Tide if they're not coming in and taking those games seriously.
Well, that's kind of what happened to LSU last year, is they lost a couple of games early on, and then I think they ended up winning the last 6 games of the season. I mean, they kept Ed Orgeron.
But this year they asked the question of, does he get fired? That's the question.
I don't know about that. I think they really like Ed Orgeron because he's very much LSU.
He speaks the language of the people.
He is LSU. I mean, you just can tell when you're talking to him and what he's saying to you. He's just LSU. He fits so well.
You gonna do it?
But
you gonna do it?
I'm not today. But I think I wanted to hear what you thought about Mississippi State, because I have liked for a long time Nick Fitzgerald. When this guy is healthy, he is a stud. He's very good. He's really good at being able to throw the football, and he can move it with his legs, and that is very impressive. And he's been impressive. But that's also why sometimes people are a little like, because with his injury, and they're going to be like that, he's okay. He's okay. And I think it's great because with Jim Moorhead there now as the head coach, he's a big offensive guy. I mean, he'll look at the defense too, and it's great that he's inheriting that. But I think he's more of an offensive guy, where he looks at, okay, what can I do here? How can I be creative? And you can be creative with a guy like Nick Fitzgerald.
Well, and just to get to my predictions, so that we can get into the college football 1 through 4 prediction, I think Georgia wins the East. I'm actually going to go with Auburn to win the West. I think they're going to be a one, same thing with Oklahoma. Actually, I'm going to say 1 to 2 loss team. And the reason why you're looking, you're like, Ricky, what do you have the Crimson Tide at? The Crimson Tide will be a 1-loss team. The reason why the Crimson Tide won't be getting into the SEC championship is because Auburn's losses, if they have 2, will be Washington at the beginning of the season and Georgia. Those will be the 2 losses. If they have 1, it'll be just Georgia. And then I'm going to have Auburn and Georgia in the SEC title game like it was last year. And this year I am going to reverse the fortune. I for a long time I was like, you know what? I'm going to still go with Georgia. They're a well-coached team, but you made me switch my mind a little bit. You made me switch it because Sony Michel's not there, and I know Sony Michel wasn't even the leading rusher when those 2 teams played in the conference, the championship game. You have their running backs are no longer there. Jarrett Stidham, I think this is going to be a year where he lights it up, where he goes, you know what? This is my last hurrah. This is the one where it's basically nut up or shut up this year. And he is going to lead this Auburn team. Do they go perfect? No. but I think they're going to do enough to where they'll lose to Georgia the first meeting, but then they will play the SEC title game. They will know that the taste of loss from Georgia so many times in the last 2 years that they will rally, win the SEC, and then, spoiler alert, they will be in the college football playoff. If the reverse happens and Georgia beats Auburn, then we could get the same thing we saw last year where Georgia's in the playoff and Alabama's in the playoff. Because Alabama will be sitting there as a one-loss team at the end of the year, not fighting for the SEC. I think we get the same thing, but this year Auburn beats Georgia in the SEC. I switched that on the spot here on the podcast.
Interesting prediction. We'll have to see what happens.
Do you have your 1 through 4 planned out?
I do.
Give me your 1 through 4.
I do. My 1 through 4.
Because I got to figure out where mine are at still.
At number 1, I've got the Clemson Tigers.
Mm-hmm.
At number 2, I've got the Alabama Crimson Tide. At number 3, I've got the Washington Huskies. And at number 4, I have the Wisconsin Badgers.
So for me, 1 and 2 are easy for me. I'm going to have, I got to look at the schedule one last time. I'm going to have undefeated Clemson as number 1. I think this defense is too good.
That's a shocker, of
course. They were
course.
the second best scoring defense last year, meaning they gave up the second fewest points behind Alabama last year. Teams were averaging only 12 points a game against them, and that defense comes back. The number 2 team, who I am going to say will go undefeated this season, also the Ohio State Buckeyes. So you got Clemson at 1, Ohio State at 2. Now you got some interesting decisions to make if you're the committee. Texas, I think, like I said before, they're going to be a 2-loss team. They're going to win the Big 12. So, I'm sorry, the Big 12 ain't getting into the big dance. So now the decision that you have to make. You have Auburn sitting there with, I didn't really give what I thought loss-wise, but if they have 2 losses, how is that going to play in? Is it going to be a Penn State situation where, hey, we're going to go with Alabama or we're going to go with Georgia, although you had won the SEC title, kind of like how Penn State was like, hey, we won the Big Ten title. And looking at it, it's going to be interesting, but I am going to go with Washington to be my 3rd-seeded team. And I am actually going to go with Alabama as my 4th. And the reason,
just like the committee would.
No. The reason why I say that is the committee, A, did that with Alabama last year, but 2, we've seen this song and dance before. Now,
Can I tell you something? That's like the 3rd or 4th time you've used song or dance, I feel
on
this podcast.
But I mean,
maybe you haven't. I don't know.
We've seen this before. Now, yet again, I'll be honest, I gave the Auburn win to Washington to boost their resume a little bit and make them be this 3 seed. But we've seen the committee do this before where it's like, hey, Ohio State, you didn't even play in the Big Ten title game. You're going to get into the college football playoff. Penn State, I know you have the title for the Big Ten, but guess what? You're not going to get in. Same thing will happen to Auburn, and Georgia fans are going to be furious because Georgia fans, here's the thing. Both teams, this will be the decision at the end of the year, what we will talk about if my prediction is right. Let's put it this way. I'll ask you. Georgia and Alabama are the 2 teams that get the 4th spot. Both have 1 loss, both to Auburn. One had it last week of the regular season. One had it in the SEC championship game. However, Georgia will have a win over Auburn. So part of me is also asking you, because I could change it and put Georgia in, and I want to know what you would think. If that was the situation, both 1-loss teams, Alabama and Georgia, the only loss that both team has is Auburn. One in the Iron Bowl, the other in the SEC title game. What would you do?
Well, I would look at the rest of their season and see how they played. And I know that most people would say, well, that makes no sense because they only lost 1 game. So they obviously played well the rest of the year. But take a look at that. But I think ultimately it kind of comes down to one team played better to make it to the SEC title game.
Mm-hmm.
They lost to them there.
Mm-hmm.
One team didn't play well enough to make it to the SEC title game. I'd probably go with Auburn.
So you're saying you would go with a 2-loss Auburn over a 1-loss Georgia or a 1-loss Alabama?
Oh, you're saying the loss was to Auburn. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Georgia. I'd go with Georgia then.
Then I'm going to flip it. I'm going to go with Georgia as my 4th team. Because
I thought you had said Auburn. But you had said they both lost to Auburn. So I would say it would be Georgia, because if Georgia is the team that beats them in the SEC title game.
Or loses to them in the title game, beats them in the regular season.
You and your
it's confusing.
freaking things.
Yeah.
Just Georgia. Just pick Georgia and let's move along.
Georgia is my 4th team. So, Brandon, I'm going to let you go first. You gave the 1 through 4. Walk us through your playoff. Go through each semifinal, who's going to win, and then who's your national champion.
All right, so Clemson versus Wisconsin, 1 versus 4. Clemson is going to be going against a really tough running back in Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor last year was tremendous. I mean, he was around 2,000 yards on the ground and double-digit touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
They return everyone on the offensive line for Wisconsin, but they return so much up front defensively for Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
Clemson returns, again, like I mentioned earlier, both of their running backs. They return a number of their wide receivers. They return their quarterback, Kelly Bryant, and another young gun quarterback that I think will be the one starting by the end of the season. I've got to go with Clemson. I've got to go with Clemson to beat Wisconsin, to knock them off, and Clemson is going to the national championship game. And then the 2-3 game, I've got Alabama, obviously, versus Washington. And what will be a good game and a rematch from a couple of years ago, Washington gets their revenge. And the Washington Huskies will beat the Alabama Crimson Tide because Washington is just a team that I think is going to be special this year. Browning is in his final year. Gaskin is in his final year. They've got a really good defense. Now, I know what Alabama has. They're very good. They've got 2 good quarterbacks, a plethora of good running backs, great wide receivers that return and then will be upcoming, and a good defense. An outstanding defense, probably by season's end. But I just think that there's going to be something special about this Washington team this year, and Washington beats Alabama. It'll be close, but Washington beats Alabama, goes to the national title game, and it's Clemson-Washington.
So you're having a national championship game that many thought could have happened in 2017.
Yes.
Who wins that game?
2016.
Well, 2016, 2017.
Sure.
Who wins that game? Clemson and Washington. Who's your national champion?
So like I said, I feel something special about this Washington Husky team this year, and I think Washington ends up beating Clemson in what would be a complete upset. Clemson would be heavily favored in the game, but I think Washington would come out, and both teams have good defenses. Clemson's is probably a notch or two better, but I think that when it comes down to it, if you look at both offenses, Washington's defense is overall better than Clemson's offense, and they will play better in this game. I like their running back quarterback combo better than what I think of Clemson's.
So, what seeding? So Clemson was 1, Washington was 3 or 2
Washington
or 3?
was 3.
Was 3. So the last time we had a 3 seed was last year in the championship game. They lost. The last time we had a 1 seed, one time they lost, the other time they won. So that's kind of how history plays into it. Mine is interesting because Clemson, Georgia, I'll leave that one for second because I don't know who I'm going to pick in that one. The other one for me is easy. Ohio State, Washington, the Buckeyes win, and the Buckeyes will move on. The 2-seeded Buckeyes are going to the national title game this year. The other one is the hard one for me because Clemson's such a great team. Georgia's also a great team. This is going to be, remember that Rose Bowl from last year? Forget about it. This one's going to be better. This is going to be the best game that we see. It is going to be so great that the national championship game will not live up to it. That is what we will be thinking. And through me talking just now, I'm trying to decide, like, who should I have win? Because on one side, you have a great defense. The other side, you have Kirby Smart, who's also a mastermind defensively. But you also have a Georgia team that is so good and so well coached. Not saying that Clemson isn't. They got Dabo Swinney. It's hard for me to pick against Clemson. I'm going to go with Clemson because when you look at it, the last 3 years they have been in the playoff. They've only played one team, lost to one team, and that was Alabama. They beat Oklahoma, lost to Alabama. They beat Ohio State, beat Alabama, then they lost to Alabama. So really there's no gauge. Maybe it's they beat Alabama that 1 year, but that was after seeing them the first year and Deshaun Watson knowing what to do. Maybe seeing a new SEC team for the first time will be too much for them, and they will lose that game. It very well may happen that
Couldn't
way.
even say
if
it.
I
Could barely even say it.
Out of my mouth, but I am going to go with Clemson. Number 1 versus number 2, Ohio State versus the Clemson Tigers. And this one is not going to live up to expectations. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like it's going to be a good game. Like, if we didn't just see that Clemson-Georgia game, it would be a good game. But it's going to be like last year where it's like, oh, the national championship was good. It came down to overtime. But people were sitting there, I know I was one of them, going, man, that Rose Bowl game was really good, though. I'm going to go with, I kind of want to pick Ohio State, but I'm going to go with Clemson. I'm going to go with Clemson to win. I want to go Ohio State. Screw it. I'm going Ohio State. Ohio State is going to win over Clemson. A field goal game because Clemson's defense is not going to give up until the bitter end. It's going to be really close. And yeah, I'm going to go with the Buckeyes to win. Perfect season for the Buckeyes. They're not going to lose a single game.
And there you have it.
Any final thoughts on this where we have gone almost an hour with these predictions?
Yes. My final thought is we will probably be so wrong. It will be
I can't
funny.
Wait. I can't wait.
But I can't either. It'll be fun.
And the thing I did not look up before this, I was going to, but didn't have the time. This is where you guys can if you want to. I don't know if the kiss of death in college sports has as much strength as it does in the NFL side. Like, I remember I picked Louisville one year. They didn't win it. I think I'm just wrong on the college side. Where on the NFL side, whoever I picked to win it all, I'm sorry, Marquise Lee. That was my fault. That happened to him because the podcast came out on Tuesday. On Thursday, Marquise Lee on the IR, and it didn't look good. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think down below in the comment section. Who's your 1 through 4? Who's winning your Power 5 conferences? What do you think about any of the predictions that we made on this podcast? This is going to be a long podcast, so just buckle right in for it as we just finished our predictions for you.